Marriage contracts in society today tend to be very one-sided and very against the male in the relationship.
So, why do wealthy people structure before getting exposed to the marriage contract?
You try to structure everything, think of asset protection, put stuff in a foundation. After you've signed on that dotted line, it's usually going to be too late. And even if you do move your assets to something like a foundation after the divorce, a court can break it apart and say you did it with fraud because you were married.
The other question that people always tend to ask is this illegal?
It's completely legal if it's done before you're married.
Welcome back to one of our episodes where we're going to be speaking about divorces, asset protection, and evil exes. That's today's topic that Jeremy actually gave us for today. How are you?
Excellent. How you doing today, Gabby?
Excellent in this beautiful place, as we always try to show that we travel pretty often because of this project that we're doing.
Yes, we do. And we're back again from Vienna. So enjoy.
So, why do wealthy people structure before getting exposed to the marriage contract?
So marriage contracts in society today tend to be very one-sided and very against the male in the relationship. That's just unfortunately the world we live in today. And courts look at it as a binding contract from the date that you sign the papers. So that means if you try to structure everything, think of asset protection, put stuff in a foundation, after you've signed on that dotted line, it's usually going to be too late. And even if you do move your assets to something like a foundation after the divorce, a court can break it apart and say you did it with fraud because you were married.
What is the biggest mistake entrepreneurs do when they're trying to do their protect their asset?
Specifically with marriage, correct?
Yes.
So when we're talking about marriage, I think the biggest mistake is they think about it once it's too late. So they got married without structuring, without setting up a foundation, a trust, something that would protect their assets and determine what happens in advance should the marriage not work out. And if they don't do that, they're sort of chasing, and most of the time it's too late. Even if the spouse agrees to set up the structure or agrees to terms of what they call a post-nuptial agreement, courts usually will strike that down.
So, the other question that people always tend to ask is this illegal?
It's completely legal if it's done before you're married. So in most jurisdictions around the world, a court will look at assets that you bring into the marriage as separate assets unless you define some other agreement before you get married. So, you have a business, you have money in the bank, you have stocks, bonds, properties. Those are usually going to continue to be your separate assets, especially if you define that through an agreement before marriage. Once you've gotten marriage, though, any assets that are earned afterwards are usually considered community property and would be split upon divorce.
Now let's speak with the legal solution that we're mentioning in this case could be the Panama Foundation, but people always ask, what is the difference between the trust or the LLC?
They're just different structures. So usually an LLC is going to be an operational company, and that operational company you can put inside a trust, you can put inside a foundation. Both trust and foundations can give very good anonymity and asset protection from a divorce. We usually prefer the Panama Foundations for a few reasons. They provide as good a protection as a trust. You maintain control of everything that's inside of the structure, unlike a trust where you're sort of passing over that control to a trustee. And also, usually Panama Foundations are just more economic than offshore trusts such as St. Kitts and Cook Islands.
Common question people get more when they are into this world and they get educated. Who owns this Panama protection?
So if we're talking about the Panama Foundation, You are the owner. Usually, the way we set it up, though, is as an anonymous structure using directors for a board who are lawyers from our office. The client ends up being what's called the protector, which is a fancy way of saying he's the person who owns, who controls the structure. And that protector, though, is designated through the deed or charter of the foundation, which is actually a private document. So that's one of the real benefits of the foundation, is that that ownership, that protector, that role is not publicly disclosed to any government. It's not in any public record. It is just listed in a private document, which you will receive.
Why do high net worth individuals then prefer the Panama Foundation over a trust?
It comes down to a few things. It comes down to the issue of control. They're not giving up control of the structure like they are with a trust. Banking, I think, is a huge one. The options you have for banking with a Panama Foundation are just far superior to what you can set up with most offshore structures that people usually compare the Panama Foundation to. We can set up banking in Switzerland, in the Bahamas, in Puerto Rico, which is a non-CRS country. Really good banking options are available with the Panama Foundation. As I mentioned before, it's also just a cheaper structure to set up and maintain.
So, if assets are placed in a Panama Foundation before marriage, how does affect the person after divorce proceedings or even debt creditors or lawsuits?
So once you've set up the Panama Foundation, unless it's a case of criminality or fraud, or a lawsuit or divorce is coming, and the court can see that you set up that foundation for the purpose of defrauding, it's bulletproof. It's almost impossible for a court to break apart the structure. Usually it'll only get broken apart in cases of criminality, in cases of fraud. If somebody wants to sue to break apart that foundation, they would have to come to Panama, they would have to file a bond, they would have to retain local counsel. And most lawyers, especially in EU countries, in the US, they just look at that structure and the cost involved and know the likelihood of breaking it up is slim to none. So it just ends there. The lawsuit just ends.
It sounds more trouble. So, what type of assets you can place inside of the Panama Foundation?
So inside the Panama Foundation, you can really put any kind of asset. You can put stocks, bonds, precious metals, crypto cold wallets, and you can put operational companies. Usually it's not recommended to put an operational company like a US LLC directly inside the foundation. What we usually do in that case is form a Panama SA, which is a limited company, and that limited company sits inside the foundation, and then that limited company, the SA, would be the entity that would directly own the US LLC.
And what is the privacy? What it's really into a Panama Foundation?
The privacy is pretty much complete. Your name is not going to appear on any government record. Panama doesn't maintain sort of a government log of all the companies, all the foundations. There's no public document or registry that will have your name if we're setting it up anonymously using the nominees. Your name is only going to appear, that ownership is conferred through the deed or charter of the foundation, which again is a private document. So nobody's going to be able to see that document unless you show it to them.
I used to remember different crypto or Bitcoin people used to say that they used to travel to different jurisdictions and leave keys in different parts of the world because it's the only alternative. What do you think about that? It makes sense with the Panama Foundation instead of going in the world and flying a locker?
That's one of those very debatable things. So we have a lot of crypto Bitcoin clients who say, no, we don't want our cold wallet information registered anywhere. We're keeping that private. We're spreading it around the world. And then there's another group of clients we have who say, no, we want the protection of the foundation. So we actually are going to take the cold wallets and write those into the Panamanian charter. So it's legally established that those wallets sit inside the foundation. Personally, I would recommend the latter. I would recommend putting it inside the foundation because then it gives you the legal framework of the foundation. Should somebody find out about those wallets and challenge or try to take them, sue you for that money.
Do they write the seed phrases into the Panama Foundation?
Usually people don't go so far, even though it is a private document of writing the seed phrases, they'll write some other identifying information for a specific wallet. So they'll name the wallet and some identifying information and put in the deed charter that it is part of the foundation.
Okay. So one of the questions that also we have just to finish about this, when people should be start thinking about setting up a Panama Foundation is before they're creating wealth, after they are doing this, or when they're in legal issues?
Great question. So it's definitely not at the point that they've amassed great wealth or at the point that they have legal issues. If they have legal issues already, that's one of those cases where a court could break apart the structure because they'll look at it as you're setting it up with a fraudulent intent. The best time I always tell people is, once your net worth has grown, it's over $1 million, you're making half a million per year in that range, then absolutely it makes sense and the cost is justified. I think when somebody's just starting out and it's a new business, they haven't amassed any net worth yet, it's too early. So you need to wait until you've acquired some wealth, but not too much. That's sort of that sweet spot where it's going to make a lot of sense.
The conclusion, we have finished this segment where we explain about how you can protect your assets from evil husbands or evil wives. This applies for everyone. So if you want to listen the next episode, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also send us your question via our DMs on X, Twitter, Instagram, and email.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will be back next week. And as Gabby said, any questions, please reach out on the socials, leave comments below, ask questions, and we are more than happy to answer any questions you have. Until next time, see you then.
Plan B is dead, is structure.
Is the future.